It was a chilly autumn night when a group of friends decided to camp deep in the forest. They were far from any trail, isolated in the heart of the woods where the trees grew thick, and shadows fell heavy. As they sat around the fire, laughing and sharing stories, a strange feeling started to creep in. The feeling of being watched. At first, they brushed it off as nerves or just their imaginations playing tricks, but then one of them noticed it. Standing just beyond the glow of the fire, half hidden in the shadows. A figure. It was tall, dark, and completely still, just watching them from between the trees. When they tried to make out its features, it was like the shadows wrapped around it, concealing any details. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It simply watched. As the night wore on, they tried to ignore it, telling themselves it was just a trick of the light. But every time they glanced up, the figure was still there. Unmoving, almost blending with the trees. A silent sentinel, watching their every move. By morning, the figure had disappeared. But as they packed up their campsite, they noticed something that sent chills down their spines. A ring of fresh footprints, circling their tents. Whoever, or whatever, had been watching them had come closer. Close enough to leave tracks in the night. The forest has eyes, they say. And sometimes, it watches. Without blinking. A solo hiker, tired and alone after a long day of trekking, was relieved to spot what looked like a campfire flickering in the distance. The sight of it brought a sense of comfort, a sign that he wasn't alone out here, deep in the wilderness. As he approached, though, something strange happened. The fire, which had burned so brightly just moments before, seemed to fade. The closer he got, the dimmer it became, until it vanished completely. Now, he stood in darkness, with only the cold and silence surrounding him. Confused, he looked around, calling out to see if anyone was there. But there was no reply, only silence and the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Then he heard it. Faint whispers. They seemed to come from all around him, echoing through the trees. He couldn't make out any words, but the tone was unsettling, as if voices were surrounding him, hidden just beyond sight. He hurried back to his own camp, his heart racing, and sat by his fire, wide-eyed and on edge. All night, he sat there, gripping his flashlight, haunted by the feeling that he wasn't truly alone in the woods. That something, or someone, was watching from the shadows, just out of reach. He left at first light, grateful to escape the haunting whispers that lingered in his mind. And ever since, he's wondered. Was that campfire ever really there at all? Two friends set up camp in a remote, ancient forest, far from any familiar trails or landmarks. That night, as they lay in their tents, a soft whisper drifted through the air. At first, it was so faint that they thought they were dreaming. But then they heard it again. Their names, whispered from somewhere beyond the trees. They called out to each other, laughing it off as their minds playing tricks in the dark. But the whispering didn't stop. It grew louder, transforming into a rhythmic chant in a language neither of them recognized. The tone was unsettling, almost ritualistic, filling the air with a tension they couldn't ignore. Now, wide awake and terrified, they sat up, listening in silence as the chanting continued, wrapping around them like the mist that clung to the forest floor. By the time dawn finally arrived, they were packed and ready to leave, unable to shake the feeling of being watched by something ancient and unseen. When they returned to town, they shared their experience, only to learn a chilling truth. The area where they had camped was once rumored to be the site of old rituals, carried out by people who believed that certain spirits still lingered, whispering in the wind, waiting for someone to hear them. A group of friends was hiking through a dense forest when they came across something unexpected, a small, abandoned cabin nestled between the trees. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to take a look inside. The cabin was old and falling apart. Dust covered the furniture, the windows were shattered, and vines crept through the cracks in the walls. As they explored, one of them noticed something that made their skin crawl. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading up a narrow staircase at the back of the cabin. Before they had time to react, a door upstairs slammed shut with a force that shook the entire cabin. Frozen in place, they stared at each other, the silence thick with fear. Then, without a word, they turned and ran, racing out into the open air. As they reached the edge of the clearing, one of them dared to look back. There, in the upper window, a shadowy figure stood watching them leave, its form barely visible through the dirty glass. They didn't wait to see if it moved. To this day, none of them have returned to that part of the forest. And they still wonder who, or what, had left those footprints behind. A lone camper set up his tent deep in the forest, seeking a quiet escape from the noise of everyday life. That night, as he lay asleep under the stars, a sound shattered the silence, a scream, piercing and unmistakably human, echoing through the trees. He jolted awake, his heart pounding as the scream faded, leaving only the rustling of leaves in the cold night air. Unsure if it had been real or a vivid dream, he sat up, straining to listen, but the forest had fallen into an eerie silence. He debated leaving the safety of his tent, unsure if what he'd heard was an animal or something else. Finally, he gathered his courage and stepped outside, sweeping his flashlight over the trees. The forest loomed around him, silent and empty, as if whatever had screamed had disappeared back into the shadows. The rest of the night passed without incident, but he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that he wasn't alone. When dawn finally broke, he packed up his campsite, ready to put the strange night behind him. But as he began to take down his tent, something caught his eye. There, on a tree just a few feet away, were deep claw marks gouged into the bark. The cuts were fresh, raw, and jagged, as if made by something with massive claws. He stared at them, feeling a chill crawl up his spine, as the memory of that scream replayed in his mind. He left the forest that morning, the image of those claw marks haunting him, leaving him with a question that still lingers: what exactly had screamed in the darkness that night?